Good morning. Should I say something about myself or? Yeah, I'm a professor of risk management, senior professor of risk management at Karlstad University, as you can see. No, you cannot see. There you can see the logo. Senior professor means something like professor emeritus, which means that I retired some years ago, but I'm still employed by the university. That's why they call it senior researcher, senior professor. I'm not a fire prevention expert. My background is in public health, in occupational safety. I've done research in traffic safety, consumer safety, child safety, elderly safety, all fields of safety except fire safety, until just a few years ago when I got involved in fire safety as well. And I find it really very interesting and challenging, this field, and I'm happy to be able to contribute with some perspectives from parallel fields like the ones I just mentioned. But let me go to the theme then. Who are at risk? And I can say directly that the answer depends. It's twofold, because it depends on which particular risk we are talking about. If we are talking about the risk of fire, of having a fire, then we are all at risk. We often tend to point at certain groups and claim that they are careless. We blame them. But the fact is that we are all careless, just in various ways. Some of us are careless with cigarettes, others with candles, or with battery chargers, or with electronics, or with cooking appliances. There are many ways of being careless. So when it comes to the risk of having a fire, the distribution across population groups is surprisingly even. There is no clear tendency, and there is really no reason for blaming. If we are talking about the risk of dying or being seriously injured, the situation is totally opposite. We have a very skewed risk profile. An uneven distribution towards medical and socially vulnerable groups. And typical characteristics are upper ages, problem with health and disability, and also some social circumstances like poor economy, living alone, problematic consumption patterns with regard to alcohol, but also medicines like sleeping pills, tranquilizers, painkillers, and things like that, also often involved. Why do we have these differences in risk profile? Let me remind you about two very essential facts. First of all fires, almost at least, start as small fires, and small fires are easier to extinguish. And that is really what people seem to do. Most people seem to be able to manage and handle their fires themselves without assistance from outside. I will come back to that. And also, even small fires can be fatal. For example, clothing fires. If your clothes catch fire, you may get fatally injured in just a few seconds. It goes very fast. And if you have a smoldering fire in upholstered furniture, your living room or bedroom may be converted into a deadly gas chamber in a very short time due to the very toxic gases that are emitted. So there is really a very weak connection between fires that are threatening property and fires that are threatening people. And many of the fatal fires goes under the radar from the national authorities' point of view. They are not aware of them. Like people who die at hospital, for example. They are alive when they get out of the fire, but they die later from the injuries they get. They are not often excluded in the statistics. And also clothing fires, either unintentionally or intentional. also is a part of that. Suicide and suicide attempts. So, and this is another way, a more statistical way, to illustrate the situation. Accidents and injuries are often illustrated in the form of a pyramid, with the most severe cases at top and the least severe at the bottom. And it is estimated in Sweden that we have about 20,000 residential fires every year in Sweden, of which 5,000, about 25% of them, are attended by the rescue services. So the rest, 3/4 of the fires, are handled by the residents themselves, or they fade out without human action, maybe some of them. But anyway, so there is just a small proportion that is attended by the rescue services and that is included in statistics and so on. The rest of the fires we know very little about, but we know from this that people seem to be capable of handling their own fires to a large extent. And if you look at the injury side of the problem, there's just only 5% of the fires lead to an injury at all, even including minor injuries. And less than 1% of the fires result in fatalities, which means that more than 99% of all fires are non-fatal. And from this we can conclude two things. Most fires are handled by people themselves, and most people are capable of avoiding physical harm from fires. So how can we explain this, that some people are at risk of dying from fires or in fires, while all of us seem to be at risk of having a fire? What is the mechanism there? Then I would like to introduce you to the so-called Swiss cheese model presented by James Reason in the 1990s. The idea is to illustrate the principle of defense in depth, that we need several layers of defenses or protective measures, usually. So if one barrier fails, others should take over. For example, if you crash your car, your seatbelt or airbags or other shock-absorbing structures in your car or alongside the road are supposed to save your life anyway. This is how it works in more and more fields. The problems with, also the holes represent weaknesses. There are no perfect barriers in safety. They all have their weaknesses, and if the weaknesses coincide and interact, the accident trajectory may pass through all barriers and cause major damage anyway. So that is what this tries to illustrate. The problem with the weaknesses is that they tend to treat people unequally. And this is what I'm going to illustrate. So if we then look at what barriers we have in place when it comes to fire. First of all, we have the possibility of preventing the fire from occurring in the first place. This barrier, as I mentioned, is very equal. It treats us equally. We are at equal risk, fairly equal. The second barrier is to extinguish the fire at an early stage before it escalates out of control. And this, as we saw, is something that most people seem to manage. But if you are stuck in bed or in a wheelchair, or if you are seriously demented or have similar problems, you are at serious risk because you are very unlikely to manage this situation. The third barrier is to escape the fire. And again, the same categories are at elevated risk. They are unlikely to be able to do this themselves. The fourth barrier is to get rescued. And this barrier depends on alarming functions and also on response time from the rescue services. And if you have difficulties to alarm and don't really understand what's going on and so on, even this barrier will treat people unequally. And finally, we have the possibility of being cured. If we are rescued alive, then our survival chances depends on the quality of the health services we are subjected to. And again, this barrier also treat people unequally because people with lowered general health are less likely to survive a certain degree of trauma. So all these factors influence the final outcome in terms of deaths and injuries and disabilities, the kind of indices that we can see in statistics and we collect data on. So this leads to, okay, most barriers show significant weaknesses with regard to the actual risk groups. That was the main message here. Leads to two conclusions. First of all, individual capacity is the key factor for survival. We can see that very clearly. Those with impaired capacities are at imminent risk due to cumulative causes, as I try to illustrate here. Secondly, over a lifespan, we are all at risk because we all grow older and are likely to end up in the risk group. So fire safety is not a matter of them, but of all of us. Thank you.